All righty. All yours.
Great, thank you, Tricia.
I think you're going to be it.
Okay.
We got one person on Maryland's on Thursday night, so I'm texting or emailing to Gandhi, seeing if she wants to come in. You wouldn't sit up there so that way you can get the.
Oh yeah, might as well, huh?
Yeah. Easier to you just.
Have we started? We've lost our audio as well, too. Do you hear the speaker?
No, we haven't heard him yet. We just sent him a message. Hopefully we'll get that figured out.
Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can.
Okay.
Now we can, and Boone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. You should be on slide 3. And slide 2 is just my ugly mugshot with my name. I'm part of the university's pesticide safety education program. I was a county and a regional horticulturalist for about 30 years based in Springfield. Now I'm based on campus. So this pest control strategy really is part of my job dealing with pesticide training and the safety. And one of the first aspects that we always talk about is expectations. In Illinois, it's almost going to be impossible to rid yourself totally of all pests. And I don't even know if we want. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know if we can rid ourselves of all pests. We are going to have dandelions, we're going to have crabgrass, we're going to have aphids, we're going to have spider mites, we're going to have black spot on roses. No matter what we do, we are going to have pests. I think our thinking should be more along the lines, can we manage that pest? Can we control that pest? And think less. If we move on to the next slide, slide 4, you'll see a Japanese beetle. When we start talking about pests and those that are annoying, Japanese beetles are a classic example of an insect that has become a pest that was non-native. Back in the 1920s, it came into New Jersey. It's moving its way west. Some people say it's moving its way back to Japan. The good news is that the winter cold coupled with last year's drought really put a crimp into the Japanese beetle. And so knocking on wood, I'm going to say I think hopefully it might not be as much of a pest this year as it has been in the past. Again, the cold froze out a lot of the larvae in the ground, so that's why we really have a lot of problems. Not a lot of problems this year. Japanese beetle, though, is a non-native, or you might call it an exotic pest that goes after a lot of our plants. Clicking again. Candace, I don't know what's going on with the sound, but sometimes it comes up that I do see that it's red. Hopefully people can hear it now. I don't know, Candace, what's going on, but I see green lights right now and I have nothing on hold, so I'm going to keep talking. Hopefully everybody can hear me. If not, email Candace. Okay, good decal. Thank you, you got sound. Corn smut is another plant that we get diseases on, and smut just is going to be occurring because of the weather. You cannot do anything to control smut. It's there. When you do see the smut, remove it completely. That's about the only thing you can do.
So we can see the CD and I'll just advance
Okay.
it, don't you think?
Yes. There you go. Okay.
Then the next image should be dandelion, still on slide 4. You have part of Japanese beetle, smut, and the dandelion. Again, dandelion is a non-native brought into the United States back during our forefathers, just spreads and spreads and spreads. If anybody thinks they can control this forever and ever and ever, let me know. I'd like to know how to do that. But it's your expectations. How many dandelions can you tolerate in your yard? Is 1 too many? Is 10 too many? My folks live out in the country. Their feeling is dandelions provide something green during the summertime, so as long as they're blooming, they really don't care. Slide 5 shows a picture of a rose, and it goes to the issue of plant selection. There are some plants that no matter what we do, you're going to have a problem with pest. Roses are one of those plants like turf grass and like tomatoes that attract every insect, every disease. If you're going to have roses, you are going to have black spot. If you have roses, you'll probably have Japanese beetles. There are some breeding programs that are making the plants more disease resistant and insect tolerant, but you have to realize that if you want that big, beautiful flower, you're going to have pest problems. The same thing with an apple. Many of our fruit plants have maybe 20, 30, 40 sprays on them throughout the growing season in order to produce the top quality of fruit that we like to have. Lower your expectations. If you're making applesauce, does that apple need to be pure? If you're making an apple pie and cutting up that apple, does it need to be a 100% perfect specimen? Obviously, no one wants to bite into an apple and find half a worm. But if your expectations aren't that high and you do see a hole, why don't you take a pocket knife, cut the apple into chunks before eating? And there's the example of the little maggot inside the apple. We live in an environment where we are going to see a lot of pests on our fruits. Fruits have high sugar concentration. It attracts insects. It attracts diseases. To have a home like this does require a lot of input. You have a pure stand of grass, you're fertilizing, you're controlling the weed. Realize that if you have the perfect yard, you are going to have more pests. No insect really starts laying eggs in those yards that have a lot of dandelions, crabgrass, weeds, bare spots, kids' toys, etc. Also, full sun for some plants actually encourages more diseases than shade. You don't have many insect or disease problems in turf grass with the shade. On the other hand, you really don't have good quality grass in the shade either. So you're going to expect dandelions. You know, that's one of the things that you see in slide 8, lots and lots of dandelions. What can you do? Yeah, you got chemicals, you can mow them. Once I saw a whole crew of prisoners just go down through a field picking every single flower off. It was absolutely fantastic doing that, but they didn't dig out the plants. So they waited 10 days, they had more dandelions. I think that was just something that they wanted the prisoners to keep doing. Sort of a physical mechanical control. But on the other hand, dandelions, as we see in slide 9, have the potential providing some food for bees. And we don't think about it, but each one of those little florets that make up that dandelion head is an individual flower that has nectar glands, and so a bee will just keep in the spring, going after flower after flower after flower. When we have some low populations of bees and we want to build them up, the more plants that we have, such as the dandelions that will bring the bees into the area, probably the better off we'll be. Slide 10 shows a pair of Bambis, more or less, that we don't want in our yard. It's interesting. I just read a book where the person claimed that you don't have deer in your yard if you plant all native plants. And I wanted to ask the person, what did the deer eat before you had exotic plants in there that weren't native? Deer are very finicky, but at the same time, if they're hungry, they're not that finicky. Do realize if you live near a wooded area, you're probably going to have deer. There are controls, but remember, deer will jump, and if deer find a plant that they like, they're going to keep eating and eating and eating it. Showing a little bit later, as of Sunday, one of the little fellows that we see associated with Easter is the rabbits. And again, rabbits are out there feeding. Most of us don't see much of a problem during the summer because there are a lot of things during the spring and summer that the rabbits will eat. Most of the rabbit damage, like a lot of the deer damage, tends to be more during the winter months when there isn't any vegetation and they start going after our trees and shrubs, particularly the rabbits, and then deer go after the evergreens and some of the fruit tree. Realize that if you're going to try to control some of our four-legged creature, maybe either total exclusion, which is fences and burying fences or making fences too high so the animal won't jump, or providing them alternative food sources may be the best way of control. For rabbits and deer, clipping some branches, sacrificing some branches, putting some alternative plants out there for them to eat during the winter months may be the best way to go. The first step with any pest control is to get out there and scout. You should be looking at a slide that has a magnifying glass on it. Scouting will tell you if you do have a pest problem. You can say, yeah, I think I got a problem, but if things are in the ground, if they're insects, if they're diseases, you're probably going to have to scout. As far as weeds, most of us can tell when a dandelion is blooming, but it may take you really careful observation to see if you have crabgrass compared to bluegrass, especially when it's germinating. Scouting involves looking through your garden at least once a week. Just get up there early in the morning, get your cup of coffee, get your cup of tea, walk out there, start looking, scout the trees, scout the grass, scout the vegetables, the flowers, look at the leaves, look at the underside of the leaves, look at the stem. We're not asking you really at the scouting point to try to control that pest, but we're looking and telling you, yes, walk out there, catch that pest when it's at the young stage. If you scout every single week, nothing's really going to explode that within 1 week's worth of time. The downside is make sure that when you're scouting, scout carefully. I always throw this slide in it because I love it. The scouter on the right side, the woman on the right side, is having her hand right on that trunk of the tree. And if you know your plants carefully, you know that she's having her hand smack dab on poison ivy. Traps are a good way to scout. Traps, especially on fruit trees and on some of the vegetable plants, can actually trap the insect, but also give you an idea of when that insect might be flying and laying eggs. We have traps for fruit plants that look almost like a typical apple in this case. We have sticky traps that you also see on slide 13. Sticky traps can easily be made by painting a board bright yellow, smearing it with petroleum jelly, which is the same thing as Vaseline, and then wait. The insects are going to be attracted to that, particularly white flies. There may be some aphids. A lot of small insects are attracted to it. They can't get away from that petroleum jelly, so they stick on it. It's a good double method of knowing if you have a problem, potentially, and then kind of controlling it. When you have vegetables such as pepper in the garden that gets white fly as well as the aphids, stick a couple of these homemade yellow traps right next to those. Indoors, some of you may remember the old-fashioned shell no pest strips, which were basically yellow strips with a little bit more toxic product, but it was the yellow in the product that actually caught the insect. Again, something easy to make homemade. With some insects, instead of the yellow, you may want to go with light blue. If you find that you have insects and they're not attracted to the yellow, put another sticky trap out there with a board painted light sky blue and then also smeared with Vaseline jelly. Once the board gets filled with the insects, take your knife, scrape off that petroleum jelly, add some more. There are a lot of other traps that you see right here. Some of them are commercial traps. You have to watch out because you don't know always if the trap is just trapping that insect or maybe it may be bringing more insects into the area. And that's one of the downsides to Japanese beetle traps. We know they will trap the Japanese beetles, but it's potentially problematic that you may actually be bringing in beetles that normally wouldn't have been in your yard. Jokingly, we say that if you live in the city, put the trap down on a light pole, maybe at the end of the block or maybe about 5 or 6 houses away. And in the country, put it on an electric pole about a quarter of the mile away. Don't put it right in your yard. Again, some of these traps will bring in more, but it also gives you an indication when the Japanese beetles and the other insects might be out flying. Slide 15 talks about another method of pest control, and that's exclusion. What we're doing here is actually having barriers that make it hard for that pest, in this case, Japanese beetles on roses and other landscape plants, to actually get to the plant. Now, exclusion is keeping that pest away. You're not controlling it, but you're doing everything to make sure it doesn't get to the plant. Again, in this case, we had some roses in the middle of the summer that were covered with a thin white cloth, almost like interfacing for those people who sew. It's essentially a floating row cover. It's too tiny for the insects to get in. Light will get in somewhat. Moisture and air will get in. Once the Japanese beetles are past their point of flying, these can be removed. It kind of looks like ghost in the landscape. I don't really think it's the best appearance. At night, when the moon is shining, it really does look kind of bizarre because it does look like ghost. Here is another method, also on the same slide, where you actually have roses that are covered with a shade type of cloth on the top and as well as the side. Now, this may be expensive for some people, and some people may say it's not really worth it. On roses, if you keep them watered and fertilized, they should grow out of the Japanese beetle damage. But if you are a prize rose grower or you're in a location where you want the roses to look good, you may have to do something like this for a month or so. Exclusion, also, when we talk about things like snails or slugs in the case here, what we're talking about maybe could be traps, but it could be methods that we're using to keep them away from the desirable plants. One of the ways to exclude them is with copper bands. The slugs and copper don't go well together. The slugs themselves will create sort of a chemical reaction with the copper, gives them sort of an electrical shock. Doesn't really kill them, but it's enough like you touching an electric fence enough that you decide, I'm not going to be there. If you are going to use copper bands, they need to be put around hostas and the other slug plants or slug bait plants about right now, and not when the hostas are fully grown. It's possible that the slugs, as they start to hatch, are going to move to those hostas, start to feed on them. I've had people who say the old copper pennies will do the same thing. The problem with copper pennies is that little kids can pick them up thinking that it's money. The copper bands, probably not so. Copper is a little bit more expensive. You have to buy copper flashing, but if you buy large pieces of it, you can take a pair of tin snips and cut it into these nice rings and put it around your hostas. You also have to make sure that the hosta leaf doesn't touch the ground on the outside of the ring, because the slugs will crawl right up on the leaf and start doing the damage. Geese is another method. It's not really an exclusion, but geese will start feeding on slugs. Lots of birds will feed on slugs, which is why they tend to be more nocturnal than working during the day. But if you have geese in your yard or chickens in your yard, they'll start pecking around the plants and get the slugs. Of course, geese and ducks tend to leave droppings that may not be that nice either. But, you know, if you get any type of the fowl, like the ducks here, like geese, like chickens, it's one good way of trying to control some of the pests. I guess you could say it's biological control. Trapping also with something like slugs. Here you're looking at grapefruit. People, if I remember right, talk about beer, which is another method. Here you see a beer trap where they've actually taken a container, put it into the ground a little bit, cut holes on the side, fill it with beer. The slugs are attracted to beer. They drown happily in beer. They're lucky to do that. Stale beer is the best bet because good beer is really worth drinking more than trying to control the slugs. But it's not the best control of slugs. You're not going to get all of them. You're going to get the larger ones. I almost want to say you're going to get the adult ones, and the young ones aren't going to come to the beer until they get a little bit older. It is a method of trying to control them. It's not really the best method, but used in conjunction with the copper rings or the copper collars, used with old grapefruits, used with boards or magazines that you might lay down over the night. You probably will get some good control of slugs that way. Let's look at some of the different types of controls before we get into a little discussion on the chemical control. When we're talking about controlling pests, chemical control is the last thing that we should be doing. We should be looking at cultural control, mechanical, physical control. We should also be looking at biological control. All of those types of controls are the types of controls that we should be doing. Going on to the next slide, mechanical control. Mechanical is like physical control. You're doing something to physically remove that pest. In this case, we're using a mower to cut down weeds. Now, a mower is also great cultural control because you're using a mower to actually stimulate grass growth. But when you want to limit weed production, either by the seeding or by making sure that that weed just doesn't grow large and tall, mowing is an example of physical control. With some weeds, though, we have discovered lately that some weeds actually, after you mow them, if they are in flower, will still continue to produce seed. So what we recommend is always mow a weed before it starts flowering so you know that you're stopping that seed production. Clipping out a nest with a pair of pruners, in this case with eastern tent caterpillar, which will probably be out in the next 1 or 2 weeks, is the method instead of going out there with chemicals. Eastern tent caterpillar, like fall webworms, create these tents that the insect lives in. For eastern tent caterpillar, they actually will move out of the tent, come back in at night. For fall webworm, they always stay in this tent and just get larger and larger and larger. When you look at some of these insects and some of these pests, yes, we go out there and we nip them off. What would happen if we didn't clip them? In most cases, the insect population builds up fast. It defoliates the tree. The tree comes out the next year, and we usually don't have an insect problem. That's because the birds have discovered these caterpillars, which are great bird food, and the bird population builds up. So a lot of times, even though we could remove this, if you're thinking, hey, I want maybe more of my songbird population to build up, if you leave them there and in some cases just slit the web, the birds are going to start feeding on them. That would be a biological control, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But here, once you have those webs, those tents, if you don't like them, take your clippers, just prune them out. It may damage the branch a little bit as far as the symmetry, but in the long run, it's better than using any chemical control. Bagworms. What you're looking at here is the fall bagworms with the second one from the right. just about ready to emerge. That's what happens when the males emerge from the bag. But mechanical control, hand picking these. If you have a small blue spruce plant, pay a kid a penny a bagworm and have them pull them off the tree. Again, that's mechanical control. Once they get to this point, which is in early to mid-August, it's almost impossible to get any good chemical control. So timing with mechanical control may be better instead of chemical control. You apply a chemical at this point in July and August, you're hardly going to get any chemical control of the bagworms at all. Hand picking. If you see a leaf that has a bunch of insect eggs on the underside, pull those off. That's mechanical control. If you don't want to do this with your hand, let's say you see a worm on a tomato plant and you don't want to pick it off with your hand and step it on with your foot, knock it off on the ground with a twig or something, step on it. If you don't want to step on it, put it in a plastic bag and squish it. If you don't want to squish it, throw it away. Those are all types of mechanical control. This is actually what the bagworm looks like. The female bagworm, I just wanted to throw that in at this point, just for some education. The female never leaves the bag once she becomes an adult. She stays there. The male finds her. She dies with the insect eggs inside her body. Her body decomposes, and the insect eggs hatch in about 3 weeks. And here's what you do. You just get a bunch of kids and say, ooh, this is fun. Pick them, pick them, pick them. And if you have a little devil in you, throw them in the fire and they'll start popping a little bit like popcorn. Oh, I know that's gross. Dandelion fork, weed control. So often we think of controlling weeds by getting the chemical out there. We have 1 or 2 weeds in our yard and we get the entire yard sprayed. I'm a big, I don't want to say hater, but I'm a big non-proponent, would be the best way of saying, of systems where you have a 4-step or a 6-step, where they're saying at this time of the year, put this product on, then wait 2 months, put this product, wait a month, put this product. If you don't have weeds in your yard, why are you putting on a herbicide? It actually does damage the soil, the bacteria, the fungi, the other microbes in the soil. If you don't have grubs in your yard or can tolerate the grubs that you do have, why are you putting on an insecticide? All products should be put on as far as controlling pests when that pest is there. Seldom do we ever recommend any chemical to be applied willy-nilly if we don't see any pest. So a dandelion fork. You have 1 or 2 dandelions, go out there, cut them out with a dandelion fork, a knife. That popping sound is great. If they come back, pop them out again. Once you start getting 2 or 3 pops out of them, they're not going to come back. They've wasted all of their energy. There's no longer the taproot there. Hoeing for weeds is the same thing. If you have some weeds, don't always say, ooh, I got to spot treat them with that spray bottle that you make it at the store. Go out, get that hoe. It's good physical exercise. Make sure you bend at the knees. Don't bend at the waist. Keep your back straight. All of that wonderful thing you're supposed to be doing correctly. Remember, using a hoe is only to dig into the ground 1/4 of an inch. It's not to dig very deep. You might be damaging other roots, but a hoe is another type of mechanical control. Lots of different types of hoes. Some of them are large. Some of them are very narrow. The thing about a hoe and the same thing about a shovel, the same thing about a dandelion fork, make sure that the blade is sharp. If you want it to do a good job, make sure that that blade is sharp. And again, slide 23 is actually showing how a hoe should be used, drug over the plants, not dug really deep into the ground. You may be damaging the beneficial plants, especially in a flower or a vegetable garden. Boiling water. It's throwing up here, and people are saying, boiling water for weed control. Well, boiling water will control an awful lot of plants. It kills them outright. I'd never recommend boiling water in the yard or the vegetable garden, but let's say you have a driveway or sidewalk, and you have the ability to carry boiling water without spilling it on you, without tripping, without spilling it on somebody else. Boiling water is a great way to control weeds when you know you can carry that water out into that area. You're cooking the plant. Very simple. Put it in the microwave, boil it on the stove, whatever. Doesn't really even have to get to boiling. 140, 160 will probably do the same thing. There is a lot of information out there and recommendations, not by the University of Illinois, about using vinegar to control weeds. You have acetic acid right there by pouring, and the recommendation is either straight or mixing it up in a solution and pouring vinegar between the cracks on your sidewalk, driveway. And I've read where people have talked about putting it on specific weeds in their yard and garden. Well, number one, in the yard and garden, it could be a desirable plant, so I'm hesitant to do that. On the driveway, on the sidewalk, straight vinegar will acidify the soil enough that it will probably kill the weed. The problem is that there's not a lot of research on it, and the research that does talk about using vinegar talks about a stronger vinegar strength than what we have in the normal bottle that we buy. Of course, if you get the stronger vinegar, the stronger acetic acid, which is the vinegar, usually they start coming in glass bottles and they can be very toxic and hazardous to human health. If you have luck using vinegar, more power to you. It's not something that the University of Illinois really recommends. There is some research out there, though I don't know if it's totally unbiased. One of the reasons that we don't promote vinegar as a herbicide is that there's no herbicide label to it. And the companies that have vinegar, like Arm & Hammer has baking soda, don't tend to promote their pesticide properties because then they have to spend tens of millions of dollars registering the product with the EPA as a pesticide. So for a master gardener to recommend vinegar, that's a big violation of federal law and a big violation of the University of Illinois policy. Will it work? It might. But if you look at the vinegar, just like you look at the baking soda, and I may have baking soda coming up, it is not listed on the label. The companies will not say that it's a good product for pesticide control. I do have vinegar or baking soda up there. And I wanted to talk that baking soda has got a lot of positive notice as a fungicide, particularly for black spot on roses. And Cornell University was doing some studies where they did show that they could control black spot or prevent black spot on roses. However, Arm & Hammer said, we're not going to spend $30 million getting that registered. And so therefore, it's not out there as a disease control. The same thing with salt. People talk about salt as control for slugs. And slugs won't cross the salt barrier. And if you do find a slug and you put salt on it, the salt will dehydrate it and then the slug will die. But it's not something we really recommend. Years ago, there were recommendations of using salt to control weeds in an asparagus patch. And it will, but it basically makes the soil worthless for anything else other than asparagus. And eventually it gets to the point where it does start damaging the asparagus. Liquid soaps, that's kind of the new thing, that if we use some of the very mild hand soaps, we can almost make our own insecticidal soap. But every recommendation would be slightly different because every one of the liquid hand soaps is a little bit different. Ivory soap, liquid hand soap, tends to be the mildest, and I'm just saying that. But if you're going to make your own insecticidal soap to control the sucking insects, your best bet is to start out on a very weak solution, and I mean very, very weak solution. See if you get good control. Look at how that control will be on that type of soap product. If you're not getting any control, bump it up a little bit. But do realize that if you bump it up enough, you may start killing your plant. So our problem with liquid soaps is that sometimes they will do a good job controlling the pests, but they will also do a good job controlling the plant. And if it's a desirable plant, particularly in the vegetable garden or the flower garden, that may not be what we want. So that being said, liquid soaps, if you make them yourselves, fine. It's not something the university ever recommends, not something master gardeners should recommend. Baking soda may work, but it's not something that we're recommending. Cultural controls. Cultural controls come down. This is slide 27. If we go to slide 8, it just says a healthy plant is a pest-resistant plant. Doesn't say pest immune. It says pest resistant. It's like you. If you're healthy, less likely chances are that you're going to be put down by the cold, or if you have the flu, you can get the flu quickly and then come back out of it. So a healthy plant is our goal. That means correct watering, correct mulching, correct fertilizing, spacing to make sure that we have room for the plant to grow. Cultural control for spacing also cuts down disease. We have air circulation, and when we have air circulation, that really cuts down on diseases, particularly powdery mildew. Slide 30 shows the watering. And our thoughts on watering, again, we know that plants need water to grow, some more, some less. But on watering, make sure that you limit your watering to early morning. If you water the plants early in the morning, the foliage will dry by the evening. You won't have wet foliage and dark, which also leads to diseases. So water early in the morning. Most plants want 1 to 2 inches of water a week. Roses may require a little bit more. If we're going through hot weather, definitely looking at more of the 2 inches. As far as watering goes, drip irrigation hoses are great. Ideally, keep water off the foliage when you're watering. Drip irrigation hoses, soaker hoses, hand watering, watering cans, anything that keeps the water off the foliage is the best. If not, again, water early in the morning, sun up to about 10 o'clock is really going to be your best times to water. Here's an example of a soaker hose. Soaker hose, to provide that 1 to 2 inches, may need to be on for 3, 4, 5 hours. But again, you're not wetting the foliage, so you really shouldn't have a big problem. If you're using a sprinkler with about 100 feet of hose attaching to it, with your typical urban water pressure, you're going to need about 90 to 120 minutes of watering with a sprinkler to provide that good, thorough inch of watering. We want to water deep. We want the roots to go down deep. If we water shallow, the roots are going to stay shallow. They're going to dry out when the soil dries out in the heat of the day. Mulches. Mulches should be 2 to 3 inches. I don't care if they're an organic mulch like these leaves right here. I did jump ahead too quickly. Mulches can also be inorganic. Shredded tires or shredded rubber are what we're seeing on the market these days. They are more of a permanent type of mulch. They may leach chemicals in the soil over time. They do nothing to improve the quality of the soil. People have talked about seeing tire mulches catch on fire with a cigarette butt. I think that may be more of an urban myth than anything else, but just do realize that, you know, if for some reason there was an accelerant on it, you do have a fuel source there, but you have the same thing with wood chips, you have the same thing with dried leaves. Mulches, when they are applied, make sure that the soil is moist before applying the mulch. Again, keep it to 2 to 4 inches at the most. During the winter, you may add another 2 inches. At 2 to 4 inches, you're not, with any of the mulches we have, having any problems with termites unless you keep that mulch continually saturated and moist. But you should be watering the soil more than you should be watering the mulch. Slide 32 talks about fertilizing. Again, cultural control. You're not controlling the pests. You're making a healthy plant. Realize that a lot of plants do need fertilizer, whether you use organic or inorganic. You're getting the plants the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. Don't over-fertilize. It's probably not going to bring more pests, but it may bring a weak plant that may be too succulent. It also may, down the road, do a lot of problems with our water sources, and you may be encouraging some plants to grow in some of our rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, so forth. So watch the over-fertilizing. Better to err on the side of under-fertilizing, in my opinion, than over-fertilizing. Spacing, proper spacing. Here we show a backyard garden with some cucumbers, some peppers, some sweet corn. It appears that there's another plant growing underneath the sweet corn, maybe some pole beans or maybe some squashes, but allow ample space. It's tough in some urban environments where you only have a small yard and you try to jam as much as possible. And I'm one of those people. I have probably 2 to 3 times as many plants in my backyard as I should, and I'm still going to be planting more. You just, as a gardener, you want everything, but do realize that allowing air circulation really cuts down on diseases. It's probably one of the best things to cut down on diseases. Tight flow, as we see in slide 34, does limit airflow and increases the chances of diseases. And you look at these and you can imagine how cute those evergreens looked at that house when they were small. But right now, there's a security problem, there's a maintenance problem, there's going to be a problem trying to maintain the density of the needles, but you're also increasing dramatically the chances of diseases because there is no air circulation among those pines. Native plants. Native plants, by and large, are more tolerant to insects and disease problems. Now, I didn't say they were immune. I didn't say they were resistant. I said they're more tolerant. You're still going to get the pests that are going to go after the native plants. Native plants, though, by and large, are going to be more tolerant. They're not immune. They're not totally resistant. On some of our goldenrod, as you see here in slide 36, we can get some insect galls, but it doesn't really damage the plants. We can see Japanese beetles, and that tends to be one of the next problems that we have, is that we have native plants that aren't immune, tolerant, or even resistant to any of our exotic insects. Native plants, yes, developed with our native insects, and so there was sort of a give and take. Doesn't mean that the native insects didn't feed or the native diseases didn't cause problem with the native plants, but they're not going to be out there totally destroying them, because if they totally destroy them, then they've lost their own life. Here's an example of an exotic pest, emerald ash borer. And emerald ash borer does affect ash trees, which tend to be native, any color, blue, white, green, pumpkin, black ash, not mountain or wafer ash, which are not true ashes. So just because a plant is native doesn't mean it's not going to get an insect or a disease. American elms get what? Dutch elm disease. That's an imported disease. So yes, native plants are more tolerant of native insects and diseases. They are more tolerant of the environmental conditions, from the hot to the cold, to the droughts, to the floods, and exotic plants are non-native plants. But in this day and age, when we have all sorts of flights going in and out, ships going in and out, containers going all over the place, no longer are we just in our own little worlds. We are truly global, and we're seeing global pests start to get more and more noticeable in the United States. So if you can't stop them, make them work harder. Japanese beetles and the Japanese beetle grubs right here. If we know that we're going to have potential problems, make it harder for that insect, in this case, to lay their eggs. Don't water your turf during July and early August when the insects are laying their eggs. The grass is hard. If the ground is hard, the insect can't stick its egg layer into the ground, the ovipositor. Make them work if they're going to be causing a problem. If you have a white birch borer, pardon me, let me back up. If you have a white birch tree with the white bark, and you know you're going to get the native bronze birch borer going after it, keep that white birch healthy. Fertilize it, water. Don't give it any stress. Make it hard for that insect to be attracted to the tree. Most of the insects that are going after trees as borers are going after stressed trees. That tree is not stressed due to good fertility, good growing conditions, good moisture. It's going to be a lot harder for that insect to go after it. Let's look at biological controls. Biological controls are something living, something that's feeding, that's alive, or has been derived, in the case of Bacillus thuringiensis, the toxins from that live bacteria. It could be anything from sheep that might be feeding on weeds, might be feeding on the grass, but if they nibble that dandelion before it sets seed, if they nibble any of those weeds before they set seed, you're not going to have a problem with them. A lot of us don't think of sheep, and a lot of us don't think, oh, let's fence in our yard with goats and sheep and use those as a control. But if you watch Downton Abbey, they have a lot of sheep around a lot of their estates, and that's what they're getting for grass and weed control. It's not new, believe it or not. Back into the 1920s, we had sheep on the White House lawn, the same thing. Still had the fence all the way around it, better way of controlling. You can imagine what they had occasionally for those Irish state dinners. We have wasps. We have a whole group of parasitic wasps. And what a wasp does as far as biological control, and a lot of the stinging biological controls, wasps, midges, flies, so forth, are actually laying their eggs into another insect. On a tomato hornworm, and I think you will see an image right there on 42 of the tomato hornworm with a lot of parasitic wasp eggs on the back of the creature. Now those eggs hatch, and guess what those eggs feed on? Not the tomato plant, not the air. They immediately start burrowing into that tomato hornworm and feeding on that tomato hornworm. But you can't imagine that's too great. On a lot of the other wasps and the midges, it's sort of like that movie Alien. There's something in the inside of that insect, and when that egg hatches, all of a sudden it bursts out after feeding on the insect, and of course that makes it very good control because that insect no longer is alive and no longer can feed. A lot of people look at the tomato hornworm right there and they'll say, ooh, there's a tomato hornworm, I'm going to get rid of it. And it looks like a lot of these little rice grains on it, and they're getting rid of those at the same time. When you see that, let that insect stay there. Let that insect keep feeding. Eventually, again, all of those wasps are going to hatch, and that tomato hornworm is going to be gone. And in fact, here you can see a couple insects. Well, you see the aphid right there at the bottom, but you can see the insect laying the eggs on that hornworm. We have good insects. We have ladybugs. This shows ladybugs in several different stages. What you see on the far right is the larva of the ladybug. It looks sort of like a dragon with orange and purple segments with black spots. That's the baby ladybug. It's probably going through 20 to 50 aphids a day, grabs them by the front claws, puts it up to the mouth, sucks the guts out of the aphid, then discards the carcass. And if you look around, even the adult does that too. It doesn't make a difference whether it's the native ladybug or on the top image, the multi-spotted Asian lady beetle that can get annoying, gets inside the house. All of the ladybugs are feeding on aphids and other sap-sucking insects. They're good creatures. However, they're not really a creature that's best bought if there are no insects there. Sort of like praying mantis, which will feed on each other if there's no other insects to feed on. Ladybugs will move if there's nothing there. So if you buy them and there's no aphids there, they got their wings. They're going to go someplace else. They're going to try to find something to suck on and actually, suck all the goop out of the insect and then throw it away. When you buy a lot of ladybugs, they're actually bought from big clusters in the mountains of California, and they've flown 150 miles to the mountains. They know in their mind that, hey, we flew 150 miles to get here. When you release them in their yard, they're saying, oops, we got to fly 150 miles. So they'll fly 150 miles someplace else. So unless there is food right there, they're going to start flying away. We got aphid lions. That's another type of creature. Sometimes they're called lacewings. You can see in the upper left, the lacewing right there. Again, a whole bunch of beneficial insects. Most of the insects, and I was talking to Dr. Phil Nixon the other day, he says there's about 17,000 insects in Illinois, and probably 100 to 300 of them are bad insects. Most of the other insects are pollinators. They feed on nectar and pollen, or they feed on other insects. So, you know, when you start controlling the insects, you may be controlling some of the beneficial insects as well. Here's a praying mantis eating a grasshopper that just happened to be in that area. Again, they're very, very solitary creatures, and if another like creature goes by, unless it's mating season, it will probably be food, and even after mating season, he may be food. We got birds. Birds are another biological control, likes caterpillar. And I have to tell a story here. I grow a lot of fennel to get the swallowtails, and I had fennels just being devoured by the swallowtail caterpillars until the baby cardinals discovered that the fennel was loaded with swallowtail caterpillars. And so the baby cardinals were feeding on the swallowtail caterpillars, which were feeding on the fennel, so I'd have the swallowtail butterflies there. Just to let you know that, you know, when you try to get something good, something else may come along and destroy it. But by having the cardinals there, I thought that was very, very beneficial. But a lot of our birds will be eating the caterpillars. It comes up to number 47, which is diversity. And diversity is the last thing we talk about before we talk about chemical control. And diversity is probably what I've been expounding for the last 10 to 15 years. What I've discovered as I put more and more plants in my yard, just as a horticulturalist with less and less space to put them in, I've noted my pest problems have gone down dramatically. And what we're talking about in slide 48 is to the point of planting that gets to be overplanted. And the more different plants you put in the yard, the less likely you're going to have one insect that's going to make an impact or one disease that's going to make an impact. I no longer have any turf grass in my backyard, which is what you're looking at from several years ago. Without turf grass, I know I don't have grub problems, I don't have dandelion problems, I don't have creeping Charlie problems, I don't have crabgrass problems. By having such a diverse landscape, I really don't get that many pest problems. I have a lot of hostas, I have a lot of shade. I may get slugs. My result, if I see a hosta that's being fed on by slugs, I don't put down anything to control the slugs, I get rid of that hosta. There are more than 10,000 registered hostas. Probably half of that 10,000 registered hosta, you could almost say are slug resistant. They tend to be the waffle, the ones with heavy substance, a lot of the blue hostas, just not going to get the slugs. So if I have a solid green hosta or a green hosta with white on it, which tends to be the type that attracts the slugs, I just don't plant them. I also make sure that when I bring a plant into my yard to increase the diversity, I also make sure I don't bring any soil with that plant. Even if I buy a plant at a garden center or nursery, I'll take it to the driveway, wash all of the soil off that plant, and stick that plant directly into the ground with the hole that I've dug with my own soil. The reason I do that is I don't want to bring any slug eggs or any other insect eggs that might be in that soil from that insect that hasn't, or that creature that hasn't grown yet, hatched yet, emerged from that egg. So diversity, increasing the quantity of plants really cuts down on the number of bad insects and bad diseases. Also, by overplanting, I'd ask you, where in the heck, when you see this slide right here, does a weed have any chance to germinate? It doesn't. You know, along the edges right there, and eventually that gets mulched, and so the weeds don't really come up. This isn't my house. I wish it was. But this goes the same thing in the front yard. And again, we have a tendency to think that the front yard is sort of like the old-fashioned parlor in the homes. Nobody does anything. It looks nice. Occasionally we may walk on it. But with good, careful planning, you can get a diverse planting in the front yard. There is some grass, as you can see right here. There's a minimal amount. Do realize then, yes, you have a minimal amount of grass. You probably may get some diseases. You may get some insects. But again, with proper turf care, you can cut down on that insect and disease problem. I threw this in. You know, any type of landscaping is probably going to be better than not. And if that's anybody here in this room in Collinsville, I apologize, because this was taken in Madison County, not too far away from here. I threw this in just as a post-Easter image, but showing all of this other stuff in here. Believe it or not, all of that cute stuff actually deters a lot of insects. You know, that little rabbit, those bowling balls painted a different color, all of these ornaments that we put in really do deter some insects. It's when you have that pure stand that you're really going to see more of a problem. It does look cute. Just happy post-Easter, everybody. Okay, finally the elephant that's in the room. And when we talk about that, going to slide 51, we're talking about chemical control. Again, chemicals should be the last choice of any type of control that we're looking at. We want to make sure we use the safest product that has the lowest toxicity. When you look on the label, you're going to read that label very carefully. It's going to say environmental hazards, none, only does damage to this pest. Well, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a pesticide that's like that, but you want to make sure that when you read the label, you're going to have a product that's not going to harm other insects, other plants, other creatures, two-legged or four-legged or no-legged, birds, fish, water sources. You're going to read that label very carefully. You want the most selective product on the market. Selective means that it will kill only what it touches and nothing else. That's not Roundup. Roundup is a great product, but it's a non-selective. It kills anything it touches. For total vegetation control, for control of weeds in an alley, in a sidewalk, in a driveway, parking lot, yes, it may be the best thing. For control of weeds in a flower garden, vegetable garden, in your lawn, that's not what you want. You want the plant that's also going to have the lowest residue, or the chemical that's going to have the lowest residue, that it won't be around the longest. Now, again, that's where Roundup actually is a beneficial chemical. Once it hits the soil, it's tied up usually within 30 minutes to an hour by the organic matter in the soil and the microbes in the soil. So there is no residual, and for that reason, that's why Roundup doesn't work good when you pour it around the root system of a plant. You actually have to spray it on the foliage so it's translocated. Another choice is organic compounds. Now, organic compound does not equate with safe. Organic just means that it's derived from nature. It'll probably break down fast, probably break down faster. Many of our organic compounds are safer than inorganic compounds, but there are some organic compounds that are very toxic. This is, again, where you have to read the label. Before choosing any pesticide to spray, you need to identify the insect, weed, disease, the pest that you're trying to control. that identification by scouting is key. It's the most important. Once you have the pest identified, then you look at the products, then you choose the product that definitely will control that pest, but also with the less toxicity, the less damage to anything else, the less residual. I didn't realize that was my last slide. Always make sure you read and follow the directions on the label. We've had other Four Seasons Telenet classes, link classes, where we talked about pest control, so that's why we didn't get into the specific ones, but we've talked about that time and time and time again. You can't tell a person enough, in my opinion. You need to always make sure that the pest is on the label, the plant is on the label, and you always follow the label. If it says 1 teaspoon per gallon, that is 1. It's not 1 1/4, it's not 1 1/2, it's not 2, it's not 3. It is 1. Make sure that you are properly dressed when you're applying pesticides. Even with organic pesticides, it usually will mean that you're in long sleeves, long pants, shoes, socks, hats, and possibly gloves. That may not be fun when it's 85 degrees out there, but again, read and follow the directions on the label. My last slide is my contact information, but I wanted to do a summary. Again, for pest control, make sure that you think in your mind, not total eradication, but management, maybe elimination, maybe exclusion, maybe making it manageable where you can tolerate some, maybe the cost isn't that excessive. If it costs you $20 to control something, and for example, tomato pest, and the tomatoes are only going to produce $10 worth of tomatoes, do you really want to spend that $20 to control $10? It's the other way around. That's great. Always think of that economic value. There is no set aesthetic value. I can't say having 2 dandelions in your yard is acceptable. Some people will say that's totally unacceptable. Other people will say 100 is a good enough number. Again, it varies from person to person. I can't state that limit. Always look at alternative types of controls, physical, mechanical, those exclusion, repellents like the copper wires, the copper bands. Think of encouraging creatures, biological creatures. If you have fish ponds, think about putting fish in there that may eat the mosquito wigglers. Even if they may be non-native fish, maybe they die out during the wintertime, at least when the mosquitoes are laying the eggs, wigglers hatch, something is there eating. And finally, if you are using chemical control, read and follow the directions on the label 100%. With that, I'm at my last slide. All of this evaluation stuff, the CDs, reporting numbers at the local sites, please do that. I will be on for another 15, 20 minutes. If anybody has questions that they want to ask questions, feel free to ask the questions. Okay. And I knew this was going to happen, that some people ask written questions and some people ask verbal questions. And I know I have a question here in Collinsville. I'll ask the squirrel question first. How do you get rid of squirrels? Don't have trees. Put your house underneath the ground. Squirrels are native. Squirrels will be there. If you try to get rid of all of the squirrels, other squirrels will say, hey, there's no squirrels in this area. I'm going to go there. You know, it's settlers. You need to keep the squirrels off the trees. I've seen people put big metal bands about 4 to 6 feet up all the way around the tree so the squirrel can't jump over that metal band. But I've seen squirrels in my yard walk the thinnest wire from the pole to my house. So short of getting rid of all trees, putting your house underneath ground so they can't jump or climb, there's not much else that you can do. I don't know of any chemical. We used to have a product called Tanglefoot. Tanglefoot we've seen some damage to the trees when people have put that on, not following the directions. So at the moment, I'm not the biggest proponent of Tanglefoot. I had a question here in Collinsville, and I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, you were talking about putting traps up, you put the yellow board and put the petroleum jelly on it. Will that trap bees also?
The bad about some of our traps is that they can attract some positive creatures. I've never seen a bee or a wasp or a hornet on a yellow trap. That doesn't mean that they won't go to it. I've seen bees on the Barney traps that we use for emerald ash borer, those big purple triangular traps. But in most cases, the beneficial insects don't go after the sticky traps as much as the harmful insects do. I would tell you, if you put a trap out there and you see a bunch of bees, wasps, and hornets get stuck to it, I would probably take down the trap. Okay, I'm trying to figure out, somebody asked a question and it popped up and then it went down. Oh.
Okay, now we see how it's kind of now.
Okay, I see now how I can do it. What can I do about a robin that is pecking the glass over my front door? I've heard people say you just put big plastic tape on it of different color for a while. What it's doing, it's looking at, I believe it's looking at its reflection and seeing that it's somebody that it wants to fight because it wants to control that area. Remember, birds don't have the largest brain. A lot of creatures don't have big brains. So what you may want to do is just put a piece of paper, newspaper over that at the moment so they aren't seeing their reflection, so they're not trying to fly through. The other thing is just keep cats away from that area until the bird figures out that they can't do anything with it. Slug control and magazine newspapers at night. Where do you place the magazine? How is it used? Since slugs are nocturnal, they will bury themselves under debris during the day, so birds, chickens are birds, so other creatures don't get them. What you do is you kind of lure them into an unsuspecting area close to those plants. You put a shingle, a piece of carpet, a couple layers of newspapers, a magazine down on top of the ground. And after 2 or 3 days, the slugs will think, ooh, this is a great place to hide. So 2 or 3 days later, you pick that magazine up. All of a sudden, you see those slugs underneath it. You can step on them. You can stab them. You can take a knife. You can take the pruners. You cut them in half. I don't recommend sprinkling salt on them. I've seen people take a scoop shovel, scoop them up, throw them on the driveway. All of a sudden, the birds see that there are slugs there and swoop down and get the birds. But essentially what you're doing is most of the plants that have the problems, you put the newspapers, you put the mat, anything that's going to attract them, and leave them there for a couple of days.
We catch and release and re-release them.
Okay, somebody asked, what's the best way to best way to handle Japanese beetles? The best way is probably to get rid of the plants that they're attractive to. Now, if you have a big linden tree, maple, big lindens, apples, crab apples, cherries, that's going to be impossible to do. What I would recommend, there are some chemicals. A lot of the insecticide 7, imidacloprid, will do a good job controlling Japanese beetles. Some people will go out there, they'll have a container of soapy water, they'll flip the Japanese beetles in the containers, and then they'll dispose of them that way. Some of them will have containers of kerosene or gasoline, which I don't recommend, because then you have to dispose of that kerosene and gasoline. If you are using an insecticide like imidacloprid, which is one of our neonicotinoids, realize that the neonicotinoids also are one of the things that we seem to be having problems with our honeybees, our native bee populations with. Definitely you do not want to use merit, Bayer's tree and insect control, which contain imidacloprid on plants that will be attracting insects. And that will be things like linden trees. I mean, Japanese beetles will go after linden trees. Bees will go after members of the rose family, the peaches, and so when those plants are in bloom, you want to make sure that there's no imidacloprid in those plants so you can get some good bee death. Again, the labels tell you this type of information. On Japanese beetles, in most cases, Japanese beetles usually don't cause enough of a problem that it kills the plant. It may on a very young plant. Once you get that mature linden tree, instead of starting to get that 12, 18 inches of growth that you had before Japanese beetles, now you're getting down to about 6 inches of growth a year. Watering, fertilize, maintaining the overall health of the plant, that's probably the best way to go that route. Okay, effectiveness and safety of milky spore. It is a Bacillus thuringiensis product, so relatively safe. I wouldn't consider drinking it, but it's probably just going to cause you an upset stomach more than anything else. Maybe the trot, so, it shouldn't be a death sentence for doing that. As far as the control of that for Japanese beetles, you have to have the Japanese beetles in your turf, dig them out. The master gardeners can tell you by looking at the raster pattern and the V, whether it's a Japanese beetle or not. They have to feed on the milky spore. They have to get it in their system. Then it develops along that route. But if they're feeding on roots and the milky spore is not there, if it's old milky spore, if it's extremely hot and the milky spore dries out, starts breaking down with the other soil microorganisms, you're not going to get that great a control. Person is looking for organic control of Japanese beetles in the turf, that's probably going to be your best control. There are some nematodes that are listed out on the market. Unfortunately, they also need an extremely moist soil and a cool soil, and we don't know how good they are when we buy them in a box that is set on the store shelf for we don't know how long. Eradicate. How do you eradicate euonymus scale? Early in the spring, before you start seeing new growth, you can use a dormant oil, which will eradicate, and that's misspelled. I was thinking, it looked almost like iridate, so I was thinking irridating in some way, shape, or form. But eradicating euonymus scale, a dormant oil early in the spring will kill the scales by suffocating them, but it will also cause all of the leaves to fall off. It will suffocate the leaves too, especially if you do it thoroughly where you're on the top and bottom of the leaves, up and down the stems. But you've just suffocated the scales, you've suffocated those leaves, but you haven't damaged the buds, you're going to get new growth. The new growth is going to come out. It shouldn't have any scales on it if you spray correctly with the dormant oil. The old leaves will fall off, no big deal. You got the new leaves. Now, if you've missed that and your euonymus is already leafing out, and my euonymus already is leafing out, so I think you've missed that, what you need to do is wait either till summer and use a really refined summer insecticidal oil, which is a very, very refined one, which won't kill the leaves but suffocate the insects, or wait until the Van Hootie or old-fashioned bridal wreath spirea is blooming. When it's blooming, the scale crawlers are moving, and you can use most insecticides such as orthene and 7 at that time to control those crawling scales, which is the stage for best insecticidal contact spray. Again, imidacloprid, some of the neonicotinoids will do a work as they are a systemic insecticide. They're going to do some control. Make sure you read and follow the directions on the label. How do you keep raccoons from taking your peaches? Put your branches up a lot higher. Have a dog chained out there that's going to get the raccoon. Maybe an electric fence around the property that's low that the raccoons won't cross. I can't think of anything else. Elizabeth Wally would probably have some very good answers for this. But, keep your branches well high enough that the raccoons standing on their legs can't get. I know that they may be able to climb the tree. If you start seeing them do that, put some other food down there on the ground where they may not start climbing. Squash bug control, look underneath the leaves when you see those rows of teeny tiny eggs. Cut that part of the leaf out or scrape those eggs on the way or onto a piece of paper and then dispose of it. Just don't scrape them on the ground. There really is no good chemical homeowner control for squash bugs that I know of. Other questions? Either other questions verbally or through the chat room.
We have a question in Kendall County.
Go ahead, Kendall County.
So I have a purple flowering plum tree.
Okay.
It has those big little balls on them, I think, that are the sap coming out. And someone told me it's because some type of insect is born through.
Well, what you might want to look for and go online, you might have something called plum knot. Now, if you have a borer in that purple plum, it should be oozing sap, almost looking like amber, as in amber jewelry. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be clear. If it is black and it's knotty, I think you may have black knot on plum, which is more of a fungal disease than you're looking at an insect. And obviously, it's insects controlled one way, diseases controlled another. But if you find out that it's black knot, then you have a fungal disease, and the master gardeners should be able to help you control with that. If you have the sap oozing and it's sort of a clear amber color sap, then you probably have a borer, and you probably either have the greater or lesser peach tree borer, or it could be a round-headed apple borer, even in the peaches and the plums, and the peaches, plums, and apples get a lot of the same insects. Therefore, you're going to need to control that borer within that tree. If you cut away that sap area, you will find a hole. You can take a thin wire and put it in the hole and maybe stab that borer to death that's in the hole. Otherwise, when the peach tree borers or the peach tree borers or the applehead borers are flying and laying their eggs, you can try to control them at that time before the insect gets inside the tree. But black knot and peach tree borers, two completely different insects. Bumps on red buds, I don't know. I'd have to see a picture of that to tell you if it's scales or insects or other insects. If you see bumps on the twigs, on the branches, and you can take a pocket knife and scrape those bumps off, you're probably looking at an insect. Okay, go down the bottom. If there are no more questions, we will sign off. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the day. I hope it's sunny and warm where everybody is. We do need some rain, not in the farm field, so you can get rain in my yard, your yard, the gardens, but definitely not in the farm fields until maybe Sunday. And then a good inch of rain will probably do the farmers wonders, and it will probably dry out by Monday afternoon or Tuesday, no matter what. So thank you for attending. Make sure that you fill out your forms that you're supposed to fill out with that online evaluation and the attendance numbers. Everybody have a good day.